Sometimes the most extraordinary miracles come from the most unexpected places. When a billionaire who had lost everything that truly mattered met a young woman whose faith could move mountains, neither of them knew their lives were about to change forever. The spinal injury from his car accident 6 months ago was permanent. The sensation in his legs was gone forever. No amount of money could buy back what he had lost in those terrible few seconds when his Lamborghini hit black ice and spun into a concrete barrier. Marcus sat in his custom-made wheelchair, staring out at the city below. The physical therapy sessions had stopped working weeks ago. The experimental treatments had failed. Even the world's best specialists had given up hope. His legs, once strong and powerful, now lay lifeless under an expensive blanket. The accident had taken more than his ability to walk. His fiancée, Rebecca, had left him 3 months after the crash. She claimed it was too difficult to handle, but Marcus knew the truth. She had fallen in love with his lifestyle, not him. When that lifestyle became complicated, she disappeared faster than his feeling in his legs. His business empire was crumbling too. Without his daily presence and sharp decision-making, competitors were stealing clients. His restaurant chain had lost 2 major contracts last month. The technology company was hemorrhaging money because Marcus couldn't focus on anything except his broken body. The worst part wasn't the financial losses or even Rebecca's betrayal. It was the way people looked at him now. The same business partners who once respected his sharp mind now spoke to him like he was a child. They would lean down when talking to him, speak louder as if his hearing had been damaged instead of his spine, and, worst of all, some would avoid eye contact completely. Marcus had tried to maintain his old routine. He would have his driver take him to business meetings in his modified vehicle. But sitting in a boardroom while everyone else stood, trying to command respect from a wheelchair, felt impossible. Every conversation reminded him of what he could no longer do. The loneliness was crushing. His penthouse, once filled with parties and laughter, now felt like a prison. The silence was so complete that Marcus could hear every tick of the antique clock in his living room. His housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, would come and go quietly, bringing meals that Marcus barely touched. Sleep had become his worst enemy. Every night, he would dream about running, walking, dancing with Rebecca at their planned wedding. Then, morning would come, and the brutal reality would hit him again. His legs would still be motionless under the covers. Marcus had started avoiding mirrors completely. The man who stared back at him looked broken in ways that went beyond his physical injury. His eyes, once bright with ambition and confidence, now held a darkness that scared even him. 3 weeks ago, he had fired his physical therapist. The woman had been encouraging, professional, and kind, but Marcus couldn't stand her optimistic attitude anymore. She kept talking about adaptation and finding new purposes in life. Marcus didn't want to adapt. He wanted his old life back. His doctor had suggested therapy, not for his body but for his mind. Marcus had laughed bitterly at the suggestion. What could a therapist tell him that he didn't already know? That life wasn't fair? That he needed to accept his new reality? That somehow this tragedy was meant to teach him something? The financial newspapers that once featured Marcus on their covers now wrote about his company's declining stock prices. Industry magazines speculated about potential buyouts and bankruptcies. His competitors circled like vultures, waiting for the right moment to pick apart his business empire piece by piece. Marcus had always believed that money could solve any problem. Need better security? Hire more guards. Want faster results? Pay extra for priority service. Facing a legal challenge? Get the best lawyers money could buy. But his wheelchair had taught him a harsh lesson about the limits of wealth. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on medical treatments. He had flown to Switzerland for experimental procedures. He had consulted with specialists in Tokyo, London, and New York. Each time, he had been certain that the next treatment would be the one to restore his mobility. Each time, he had been wrong. The accident had happened on his way to propose to Rebecca. The engagement ring, a 5-carat diamond that cost more than most people's annual salary, still sat in his bedroom drawer. Sometimes he would hold it and remember how excited he had been that night, how certain he had been that his life was perfect. Now his days blended together in a pattern of emptiness. Wake up, struggle through basic tasks that once took seconds, eat breakfast alone, pretend to work on business matters, eat lunch alone, stare out the window, eat dinner alone, and try to fall asleep despite the thoughts racing through his mind. His family had tried to help at first. His sister flew in from California twice, bringing positive energy and suggestions for activities they could do together. But Marcus had pushed her away with his bitter attitude and constant complaints. His parents, both in their 70s, had offered to move closer to help care for him. Marcus had refused their help too. The truth was that Marcus didn't want anyone to see him like this. The man who had once commanded respect in every room he entered now felt like a shadow of his former self. He had built his identity around being strong, successful, and independent. The wheelchair had stripped away all of those things. His penthouse had become both his sanctuary and his prison. Everything was accessible now, modified at great expense to accommodate his wheelchair. Ramps replaced stairs, grab bars were installed in every bathroom, and elevators had been upgraded. But these changes only reminded him daily of his limitations. Marcus had always been a fighter. In business, he had never backed. The morning of September 16th started with rain. Marcus watched the droplets race down his penthouse windows as his housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, prepared his breakfast. She had been with him for 3 years, long enough to know that conversation wasn't welcome during his dark moods. The silence between them had become comfortable in its own way. Mrs. Rodriguez was different from his other employees. She was a small woman in her 50s with graying hair and calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. Unlike others who now treated him with careful politeness, she maintained the same respectful but direct manner she had always used. Sometimes Marcus caught her watching him with an expression that seemed to hold both sadness and something else he couldn't quite identify. After breakfast, Marcus had planned to review financial reports from his hotel chain. The numbers had been declining steadily, and his board of directors was pressuring him to make decisions about potential closures. But as he sat at his mahogany desk, the papers felt meaningless. The profit margins and occupancy rates that once fascinated him now seemed like abstract concepts that belonged to someone else's life. Around 11 o'clock, Mrs. Rodriguez approached him hesitantly. This was unusual because she typically worked silently around the apartment, respecting his need for solitude. "Mr. Wellington," she said softly, "my granddaughter is here. She was hoping to meet you." Marcus looked up from his papers, irritated by the interruption. "I'm not really in the mood for visitors today." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded, but didn't move away immediately. "She's been asking about you for weeks. Ever since I told her about your situation." "What about my situation?" Marcus's voice carried an edge of anger. He had specifically asked Mrs. Rodriguez not to discuss his personal affairs with anyone. "She's been praying for you," Mrs. Rodriguez said simply. "Every night before bed. She asked if she could pray for you in person." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Prayer. As if some cosmic force was going to suddenly decide he deserved to walk again. He had never been particularly religious, and the accident had certainly not improved his relationship with any concept of a benevolent universe. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm not interested in prayer right now," he said, turning back to his papers. Mrs. Rodriguez remained standing beside his desk. "She's very persistent. She's been sitting in the lobby for 2 hours, telling the security guard that she knows you want to meet her." Despite his irritation, Marcus felt a flicker of curiosity. What kind of child would sit in a lobby for 2 hours to meet a stranger? And how had she convinced building security to let her stay? "How old is your granddaughter?" he asked. 12. "But she acts much older sometimes." Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. The last thing he needed was some well-meaning child trying to make him feel better with juvenile optimism and awkward conversations about his wheelchair. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I really don't think this is a good idea. I'm not exactly good company these days." "She doesn't care about good company," Mrs. Rodriguez said with a small smile. "She cares about healing." Before Marcus could respond, Mrs. Rodriguez had walked toward the elevator. He heard the soft ding as it arrived, followed by quiet voices in the hallway. A few minutes later, she returned with a young girl who seemed to radiate an unusual sense of calm confidence. The girl was African American with intelligent dark eyes and hair pulled back in neat braids. She wore a simple navy blue dress and scuffed sneakers that suggested she had walked a considerable distance. What struck Marcus most was her posture. Despite being only 12, she carried herself with a dignity that many adults never achieved. Mr. Wellington, Mrs. Rodriguez said, "This is my granddaughter, Destiny." Destiny stepped forward without hesitation and extended her hand toward Marcus. As he shook her small hand, he was surprised by the firmness of her grip and the steady way she maintained eye contact. "Thank you for letting me visit," Destiny said. Her voice was clear and strong, without the shyness Marcus expected from someone her age meeting a stranger. "To be honest, I didn't exactly agree to this visit," Marcus said, glancing at Mrs. Rodriguez. "But you're here now." Destiny smiled, seemingly unbothered by his less than enthusiastic welcome. "Grandma Rosa told me you've been having a difficult time since your accident." Marcus bristled at the casual way she mentioned his condition. Most adults spent considerable effort avoiding direct references to his wheelchair or his limitations. This child addressed it as easily as commenting on the weather. "That's one way to put it," Marcus said carefully. Destiny looked around the penthouse apartment, taking in the expensive furniture, the artwork on the walls, and the panoramic view of the Detroit skyline. But her expression didn't show the awe or impressed reaction Marcus usually saw from visitors. "You have a beautiful home," she said politely. "But it feels sad." The blunt observation caught Marcus off guard. In his business dealings, people rarely spoke to him with such direct honesty, especially children. "What do you mean it feels sad?" he asked. Destiny tilted her head slightly, as if considering how to explain something complex to someone who might not understand. "Sometimes places absorb the emotions of the people who live there. Your home feels like it's been holding a lot of sadness and anger." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the child's perceptive comment, but he was also intrigued despite himself. "You believe places can feel emotions?" "I believe everything is connected," Destiny said matter-of-factly. "People, places, feelings, prayers. It's all part of the same energy." Mrs. Rodriguez had moved to the kitchen area, giving them space to talk, while remaining close enough to supervise. Marcus found himself studying Destiny more closely. There was something unusual about her composure and the way she spoke. She didn't seem like any 12-year-old he had ever met. "Your grandmother mentioned that you've been praying for me," Marcus said. "Why would you pray for someone you've never met?" "Because Grandma Rosa cares about you," Destiny answered simply. "And because everyone deserves prayer, especially when they're hurt." "I assume she told you about my accident." "She told me you can't walk anymore, and that you're very angry about it." Marcus almost smiled at her directness. "That's a pretty accurate summary." Destiny moved closer to his wheelchair, but not in the careful, overly cautious way most people approached him. She seemed completely comfortable with his mobility device, as if it was just another piece of furniture. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead. Before your accident, were you happy?" The question surprised Marcus. Most people asked about his physical condition, his recovery prospects, or his business concerns. No one had asked about his happiness in months. "I thought I was happy," he said slowly. "I had everything I wanted. Success, money, a beautiful fiancée. But were you actually happy?" Destiny pressed gently. "Like, deep down in your heart happy?" Marcus considered the question seriously. Before the accident, his life had been a constant rush of achievements, acquisitions, and accomplishments. He had measured his worth by his net worth, his success by his possessions. But happy? He wasn't sure he had stopped moving long enough to consider whether he was truly happy. "I don't know," he admitted. "I was busy. I was successful. I thought happiness would come naturally from those things." Destiny nodded as if his answer made perfect sense to her. Sometimes we think we need certain things to be happy, but those things are just distractions from what really matters. "And what really matters?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about this child's perspective. "Love, connection, purpose, faith," she said, each word with the conviction of someone much older. "Those things don't change when your body changes." Marcus felt a flutter of irritation return. That's easy to say when you're 12 and can walk wherever you want to go. Instead of being offended by his sharp tone, Destiny seemed to consider his point carefully. "You're right. I can't understand exactly what you're going through. But I can understand what it feels like to lose something important." "What have you lost?" Marcus asked, then immediately regretted the question. He didn't want to get drawn into personal conversations with this child. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 8, Destiny said simply. "I lived with my grandmother after that, but she died last year." Now I live with Grandma Rosa. But she's not really my grandmother. She's just someone who cares enough to take care of me." Marcus stared at her, stunned by the casual way she had revealed such significant losses. Here was a child who had experienced more genuine tragedy than many adults ever faced, yet she seemed to possess a peace that had completely eluded him despite his privileged life. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't know." "It's okay. Sad things happen sometimes. But that doesn't mean hope has to die." Mrs. Rodriguez approached from the kitchen, carrying a tray with coffee for Marcus and what appeared to be hot chocolate for Destiny. "Destiny has a gift," Mrs. Rodriguez said as she set down the drinks. "She sees things differently than most people." "What kind of gift?" Marcus asked. Destiny shrugged, as if the question wasn't particularly important. "I just know things sometimes. And I know that you're going to walk again." The statement hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus felt his carefully controlled emotions surge toward the surface. How dare this child, this stranger, make such a claim about his condition when the world's best doctors had given up hope? "That's impossible," Marcus said, his voice tight with anger. "The doctors have been very clear about my prognosis." "Doctors know about medicine," Destiny said calmly. "But they don't know about miracles." "Miracles don't exist," Marcus snapped. "If they did, don't you think I would have experienced one by now? Don't you think my doctors would have seen one in their careers?" Destiny took a sip of her hot chocolate and studied Marcus with those intelligent dark eyes. "Miracles happen every day. Most people just don't recognize them because they're looking for something different than what they receive." Marcus wanted to argue further, to explain to this naive child how the real world actually worked. But something in her unwavering calm stopped him. She wasn't speaking with the blind optimism of someone who didn't understand his situation. She was speaking with a certainty that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than hope. "Even if miracles exist," Marcus said more quietly, "what makes you think I deserve one?" For the first time since she had entered his apartment, Destiny looked surprised by his question. "Why would you think you don't deserve healing?" Marcus couldn't answer immediately. The question touched on feelings he had been avoiding for months. Part of him wondered if the accident had been some kind of cosmic punishment for his selfish lifestyle, his focus on wealth over relationships, his neglect of anything that couldn't be measured in profit margins. "I haven't exactly been a good person," he said finally. "I've been focused on myself, my success, my wants. Maybe this is what I deserved." Over the next 3 days, Destiny returned to Marcus's penthouse each afternoon. Mrs. Rodriguez would finish her regular cleaning duties and then quietly escort her granddaughter upstairs. What had started as an unwelcome intrusion was becoming the part of each day that Marcus found himself anticipating most. Their conversations weren't what Marcus had expected. Destiny didn't offer platitudes or empty encouragement. Instead, she asked questions that made him think about his life in ways he had never considered before. On her second visit, she had asked him about his childhood dreams. Marcus found himself telling her about his early fascination with architecture and his teenage fantasy of designing buildings that could withstand any natural disaster. He hadn't thought about those dreams in decades, having long ago abandoned creative pursuits for more profitable ventures. "Why did you stop wanting to build things?" Destiny had asked. "Building things doesn't make as much money as buying and selling them," Marcus had explained. "But did buying and selling things make you feel the way building things made you feel?" The question lingered in Marcus's mind long after she left that day. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt genuine excitement about his work, the kind of enthusiasm he had experienced as a young man sketching building designs. On her third visit, Destiny brought a small notebook filled with drawings. She showed Marcus detailed sketches of buildings that seemed to defy gravity, with spiraling towers and impossible angles that somehow looked perfectly balanced. "I want to be an architect when I grow up," she said. "Grandma Rosa says it's not practical because we don't have money for college, but I think if you really want something, you find a way to make it happen." Marcus studied her drawings with genuine admiration. The child had raw talent and an imaginative vision that reminded him of his own youthful passion for design. "These are remarkable," he said. "You have real potential. Will you teach me?" Destiny asked without hesitation. "I mean, when you're better and walking again, could you show me about buildings and design?" The casual certainty with which she spoke about his recovery continued to unnerve Marcus. But Something about her unwavering faith was beginning to create tiny fissures in his wall of skepticism. "I don't know if I remember enough to be a good teacher," Marcus said. "It's been a long time since I thought about architecture. Maybe teaching me would help you remember what you loved about it," Destiny suggested. That evening, after Destiny had gone home with Mrs. Rodriguez, Marcus found himself pulling out his laptop and researching current architectural trends. For the first time in months, he lost track of time while absorbed in something other than his physical limitations or business problems. During her fourth visit, Destiny made a request that surprised him. "I want to pray with you," she said. "Not for you, but with you." Marcus shook his head immediately. "I told you, I'm not religious." "This isn't about religion," Destiny said patiently. "This is about connecting with something bigger than ourselves. You don't have to believe in God. You just have to believe in possibility." "I don't know how to pray," Marcus admitted. "Neither did I when I first started. My grandmother taught me that prayer is just talking honestly about what you hope for and what you're afraid of." Marcus considered her suggestion. What could it hurt? He had tried expensive medical treatments, experimental procedures, and countless medications. Compared to those invasions of his body, a conversation with the universe seemed relatively harmless. "What would I say?" he asked. "Whatever feels true to you right now." Marcus closed his eyes and tried to quiet his usually racing thoughts. After a long moment of silence, he began speaking slowly. "I'm scared," he said. "I'm scared that this is permanent. I'm scared that I'll never feel whole again. I'm scared that I've wasted my life focusing on things that don't really matter." Destiny's small hand found his larger one. "Keep going," she whispered. "I want to believe that healing is possible, but I'm afraid to hope because I don't think I can handle being disappointed again. I want to walk, but more than that, I want to feel like myself again. I want to remember what it felt like to be excited about life." As the words tumbled out, Marcus realized he was expressing feelings he hadn't even acknowledged to himself. The prayer, or whatever this exercise was, had become a kind of emotional release he desperately needed. When he finished speaking, Destiny squeezed his hand gently. "Now listen," she said. "Listen for what? For the answer. It might not come in words. It might come as a feeling or an image or just a sense of knowing." Marcus sat quietly, trying to empty his mind of its constant chatter. At first, he heard only the familiar sounds of the city below and the hum of his apartment's ventilation system. But, gradually, something deeper emerged from the silence. He couldn't explain it rationally, but he began to experience a sense of warmth that seemed to start in his chest and slowly spread throughout his body. It wasn't a physical sensation exactly, but something more like emotional sunlight breaking through clouds. For just a moment, he had a clear image of himself standing beside Destiny, both of them looking at architectural drawings spread across his dining room table. The vision felt so real and immediate that he opened his eyes expecting to see it happening. "What did you experience?" Destiny asked softly. "I saw us working on building designs together," Marcus said, feeling slightly foolish. "It felt very real." Destiny smiled with satisfaction. "That was your spirit remembering what's possible. Your body might be hurt, but your spirit knows the truth about who you really are and what you're meant to do." Over the following days, Marcus found himself looking forward to these prayer sessions. Each time, he was able to speak more honestly about his fears and hopes. And each time, he received what felt like glimpses of a different future than the one he had been imagining. During one session, he experienced a powerful sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. During another, he was overcome with gratitude for people like Mrs. Rodriguez and Destiny who had shown him kindness without expecting anything in return. But it was during their seventh session together that something extraordinary happened. Marcus had been sharing his frustration about the way his business associates now treated him differently, speaking louder and slower as if his intelligence had been damaged along with his spine. As he talked, he became more animated than usual, leaning forward in his wheelchair to emphasize his points. "I'm the same person I was before the accident," he said passionately. "My mind works exactly the same way. My experience and knowledge haven't changed. But people act like I'm a completely different person just because I can't walk." "You are different," Destiny said gently. "But not in the ways they think." "What do you mean?" "You're more honest now. More real. Before your accident, Grandma Rosa says you were always rushing, always busy, always thinking about the next deal or the next achievement. Now you actually listen when people talk. Now you think about deeper questions. Now you care about things that really matter. Marcus considered her observation. She was right that he had changed in ways beyond his physical condition. The forced slowness of his new reality had created space for reflection he had never allowed himself before. Maybe the accident wasn't just something that happened to you, Destiny continued. Maybe it was something that happened for you. What could possibly be good about losing the ability to walk? Marcus asked. Maybe you needed to stop running so fast that you could start paying attention to where you really wanted to go. As they sat in contemplative silence, Marcus became aware of an unusual tingling sensation in his legs. At first, he dismissed it as wishful thinking or the phantom sensations his doctors had warned him about. But the feeling persisted and seemed to grow stronger. Destiny, he said quietly. I think I feel something in my legs. Her eyes widened, but she didn't seem surprised. What kind of feeling? Like electricity, but warmer. Like my legs are waking up after being asleep. Destiny stood up from her chair and moved to kneel beside his wheelchair. May I touch your legs? She asked. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure why. Destiny placed her small hands gently on his knees, closing her eyes and breathing deeply. The sensation in Marcus's legs had continued throughout the night. When he woke the next morning, the tingling had evolved into something that felt more like actual feeling returning to limbs that had been numb for months. He tested the sensation by pressing his hand firmly against his thigh and was amazed to feel the pressure distinctly. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived for work earlier than usual, bringing Destiny with her. The child seemed to radiate an energy and excitement that filled the apartment as soon as she entered. How are your legs feeling this morning? Destiny asked without preamble. Different, Marcus said, still hesitant to fully trust what he was experiencing. I can feel sensations I haven't felt since the accident. That's wonderful, Mrs. Rodriguez said softly. I've been praying for you all night. Marcus looked at his housekeeper with new appreciation. He had always respected her work ethic and discretion, but he was beginning to understand that her care for him extended far beyond professional obligation. Today we're going to try something new, Destiny announced. We're going to see if your muscles remember how to work. My physical therapist already tried muscle stimulation exercises, Marcus said. Nothing happened. This is different, Destiny said with the confidence that Marcus had come to associate with all her pronouncements. This time, your mind and spirit are ready to work with your body instead of fighting against it. She pulled a chair close to his wheelchair and sat down facing him. I want you to close your eyes and imagine feeling returning to every part of your legs. Not just hoping for it or wishing for it, but actually seeing and feeling it happening. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to follow her guidance. At first, his rational mind insisted that this was an exercise in fantasy. But as he focused on the image of sensation flowing through his legs, the tingling feeling grew stronger and more defined. Now, Destiny said softly, I want you to imagine your muscles remembering their strength. See the connection between your brain and your legs being restored. As Marcus concentrated on this visualization, he became aware of what felt like electrical impulses moving down his spine and into his legs. The sensation was unlike anything his doctors had described as typical for spinal injury patients. Can you try to move your toes? Destiny asked. Marcus had attempted this exercise hundreds of times over the past 6 months, always with the same disappointing result. But something about this moment felt different. Instead of commanding his toes to move through sheer willpower, he approached the task with a gentleness and faith he had never tried before. He imagined his toes wiggling freely, flexing and pointing as they had thousands of times before his accident. He visualized the muscles in his feet contracting and releasing with easy, natural movement. Then, incredibly, he felt something shift. It was subtle at first, just the slightest sensation of movement in his right foot. But, as he maintained his focused visualization, the feeling became stronger and more unmistakable. Destiny, he said, his eyes still closed. I think my toes are moving. Open your eyes and look, she whispered. Marcus opened his eyes and looked down at his feet. To his amazement, he could see the slight but definite movement of his toes inside his shoes. The motion was small and tentative, but it was real and completely under his conscious control. Mrs. Rodriguez gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Dios mío, she whispered. It's a miracle. Marcus stared at his feet in wonder, commanding his toes to move again and watching in astonishment as they responded. Tears began streaming down his face as the reality of what was happening began to sink in. How is this possible? He asked. Your body was never really broken, Destiny explained. The injury created blockages, but your spirit knew how to clear them when you were ready to believe in healing. Over the next hour, they worked together to expand the returning sensation and movement. Marcus found that he could flex his ankles slightly and was beginning to feel pressure and temperature in his feet. Each small success felt like a major victory after months of complete numbness. I think we should try standing, Destiny said. Marcus felt a surge of fear at the suggestion. He had attempted to stand several times during his early rehabilitation, but his legs had been completely unable to support his weight. The falls had been both physically painful and emotionally devastating. I don't think I'm ready for that, he said. Your mind isn't ready, but your body is, Destiny said gently. We'll do it very slowly, and Mrs. Rodriguez, and I will help support you. Mrs. Rodriguez, despite being a small woman, positioned herself on one side of the wheelchair while Destiny stood on the other. Marcus gripped the arms of his chair and took a deep breath. Don't think about standing, Destiny coached. Just think about your legs remembering their strength. Trust that your body knows what to do. Marcus closed his eyes again and focused on the visualization of his leg muscles engaging and supporting his weight. As he leaned forward in his wheelchair, he felt an extraordinary surge of sensation through his thighs and calves. Slowly, incredibly, he felt his legs beginning to take some of his weight. The sensation was wobbly and uncertain, but it was unmistakably real. With Mrs. Rodriguez and Destiny providing gentle support on either side, Marcus managed to lift himself partially out of his wheelchair. He remained in this position for only a few seconds before his legs began to shake with the effort, but those few seconds represented more progress than 6 months of traditional physical therapy had achieved. I stood up, he said in amazement as he settled back into his wheelchair. I actually stood up. This is just the beginning, Destiny said, her face glowing with joy. Every day, you'll be able to do more. Word of Marcus's progress spread quickly through the building staff. His security guards, who had watched him struggle with depression for months, began greeting him with genuine smiles and encouragement. His building's concierge, a man named David who had always been professionally polite, stopped by the penthouse to personally congratulate Marcus on his improvement. But the most significant change was in Marcus himself. The bitter anger that had consumed him for months was being replaced by something he had almost forgotten existed: genuine excitement about the future. He began reaching out to business contacts he had been avoiding, not to discuss deals or financial matters, but to share the news of his recovery. Most were amazed and supportive, though some seemed skeptical that such rapid improvement was possible. Dr. Harrison, Marcus's neurologist, insisted on conducting a comprehensive examination when Marcus called to report his progress. The doctor's tests confirmed that Marcus was indeed regaining sensation and muscle function in his lower body, but he cautioned against getting too optimistic too quickly. Spinal injuries can be unpredictable, Dr. Harrison explained. Sometimes patients experience temporary improvements that don't last. I want to monitor your progress carefully before making any definitive statements about your recovery. But Marcus was no longer interested in medical caution or scientific skepticism. He had experienced something beyond the reach of conventional medicine, and he was ready to embrace whatever was possible. Each day brought new improvements. By the end of the week, Marcus could stand for nearly a minute without assistance. His sensation had returned to most of his legs, and he was beginning to regain muscle strength throughout his lower body. More importantly, his entire perspective on life was shifting. The business empire that had once seemed like the most important thing in the world now felt secondary to the relationships he was building with people like Mrs. Rodriguez and Destiny. He began making plans that extended far beyond financial recovery. He wanted to establish a scholarship fund for students like Destiny who had architectural dreams but lacked financial resources. He wanted to redesign his business practices to prioritize employee welfare and community impact over maximum profit. During one of their daily sessions, Destiny asked him a question that crystallized his transformation. "When you can walk again," she said, "what's the first place you want to go?" Marcus considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, he would have said his office, or his favorite restaurant, or perhaps Rebecca's apartment to show her what she had missed by leaving him. "I want to go to the community center where you and Mrs. Rodriguez volunteer," he said. "I want to see the place where you learn to care so much about helping other people." Destiny smiled with satisfaction. Now you're thinking like someone 3 weeks after Destiny first whispered her impossible promise. Marcus Wellington III took his first independent steps in over 6 months. It happened on a Tuesday morning in October, with autumn sunlight streaming through his penthouse windows, and Mrs. Rodriguez quietly preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Destiny had arrived early, carrying a small wrapped package that she placed carefully on Marcus's dining room table. She had been unusually quiet during their morning prayer session, but Marcus could sense an anticipation in her demeanor that suggested something significant was about to happen. "Today feels different," Marcus said as they finished their meditation together. "Today is different," Destiny confirmed. "Today you're going to walk across this room without any help." Marcus looked at the distance between his wheelchair and the windows overlooking the Detroit River. It seemed like a vast space, much farther than the few supported steps he had managed in recent days. "Are you sure I'm ready?" he asked. "I've been sure since the day I met you," Destiny said with a smile. "The question is whether you're ready to trust what your spirit already knows." Marcus transferred from his wheelchair to the couch, a movement that had become much easier as his core strength returned. From there, he slowly pushed himself to a standing position, marveling once again at the miraculous return of sensation and control in his legs. Destiny positioned herself near the windows, about 15 feet away from where Marcus stood. "Walk to me," she said simply. Marcus took a deep breath and lifted his right foot, placing it carefully forward. The step felt strong and confident, nothing like the tentative movements he had made during his early recovery attempts. He followed with his left foot, then his right again, establishing a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Step by step, Marcus crossed his living room under his own power. His movements were slightly careful and deliberate, but they were undeniably the steps of a man who was truly walking again. When he reached Destiny, she wrapped her arms around his waist in a hug that conveyed more joy than any words could express. Mrs. Rodriguez had been watching from the kitchen doorway, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the completion of what she had been praying for since the day of Marcus's accident. "Gracias, Dios," she whispered. "Gracias por este milagro." But the miracle was about more than restored mobility. Over the past month, Marcus had undergone a transformation that touched every aspect of his life. The man who had once measured success solely through financial achievement was discovering entirely new definitions of wealth and purpose. His business empire, which had been declining during his months of depression and disengagement, was now thriving under his renewed leadership. But Marcus was approaching his companies with a completely different philosophy. Instead of maximizing short-term profits, he was investing in employee development, community partnerships, and sustainable business practices. He had personally visited each of his hotels and restaurants, walking through them with renewed appreciation for the people who made them successful. He implemented generous healthcare benefits for all employees, established educational assistance programs, and created pathways for advancement that had never existed before. The most significant change was his relationship with money itself. Marcus was beginning to understand that his wealth was not a trophy to be accumulated, but a tool to be used for positive impact. He had already begun planning the Destiny Foundation, an educational nonprofit that would provide scholarships and mentorship for young people pursuing careers in architecture and engineering. Dr. Harrison had been amazed by Marcus's complete neurological recovery. After extensive testing, he could find no medical explanation for the restoration of function to Marcus's spinal cord. The doctor had begun referring to Marcus's case as exceptional and unprecedented in his medical reports. "I've been practicing neurology for 25 years, Dr. Harrison told Marcus during his final examination. "I've never seen a recovery like yours." From a strictly medical perspective, what happened to you shouldn't have been possible. Marcus just smiled and said, sometimes the impossible happens when you're open to it. Rebecca had reached out when news of his recovery began circulating through their social circle. She called several times and sent flowers with notes expressing her regret about their breakup and her desire to reconcile. Marcus felt no anger toward her, but he also felt no desire to rebuild their relationship. She fell in love with who I was pretending to be, he explained to Destiny. I'm not that person anymore, and I don't want to be. Destiny had opened her wrapped package that morning to reveal a beautifully bound sketchbook filled with blank pages. For our architectural projects, she explained. When you're ready to start building things that matter. Marcus accepted the gift with deep gratitude. They spent the afternoon working together on preliminary designs for a community center that would serve the neighborhood where Mrs. Rodriguez lived. The building would include educational spaces, recreational facilities, and a health clinic providing free services to families in need. As they worked, Marcus was struck by the natural ease of their collaboration. Destiny's creative vision and his practical experience complemented each other perfectly, producing design concepts that neither could have achieved alone. You're an excellent teacher, Destiny said as they reviewed their sketches. You make complicated things seem simple to understand. You're an exceptional student, Marcus replied. You see possibilities that I would never consider on my own. Mrs. Rodriguez had been quietly observing their partnership throughout the afternoon. As evening approached and it came time for her and Destiny to return home, she approached Marcus with an expression of maternal pride. Mr. Wellington, she said, I want to thank you for believing in Destiny's gift. Not many adults would have listened to a 12-year-old girl making promises about miracles. I think Destiny saved my life, Marcus said honestly. Not just by helping me walk again, but by showing me what life could be if I stopped focusing on what I didn't have and started appreciating what I do have. Destiny hugged Marcus goodbye with the easy affection that had developed between them over the past month. This isn't really goodbye, she said. We have too much work to do together. After they left, Marcus walked around his apartment, still marveling at the simple pleasure of moving under his own power. But, more than that, he marveled at the person he had become through this extraordinary experience. The accident that had once seemed like the worst thing that could happen to him was beginning to feel like the best thing that had ever happened. It had stripped away his illusions about what mattered and forced him to discover who he really was beneath all the external measures of success. He called his sister in California to share the news of his recovery. She cried with joy and immediately made plans to visit. His parents, who had been worried sick about his depression and withdrawal, were overjoyed to hear the warmth and enthusiasm return to his voice. Marcus had also reached out to several former employees he had treated poorly during his years of single-minded profit pursuit. He apologized for his past behavior and offered job opportunities to those who were interested in joining his reformed business practices. Most importantly, he was establishing genuine relationships with people in his community. Through Mrs. Rodriguez, he had met families who were struggling with poverty, illness, and unemployment. Marcus was learning to use his resources not just to write checks, but to create sustainable solutions that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. Standing at his windows that evening, looking out at the city lights reflecting on the Detroit River, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been physically whole but spiritually broken. Tonight, he was both physically restored and spiritually awakened. The phone rang, interrupting his contemplation. It was David from the building's front desk. Mr. Wellington, David said, there's a young lady here asking to see you. She says her name is Sarah and that Destiny sent her. She's asking about architectural scholarships. Marcus smiled, understanding that his new life was just beginning. Send her up, he said. I'll be happy to meet with her. As he waited for the elevator to bring another young person seeking guidance and opportunity, Marcus realized that Destiny's whispered promise had been even more powerful than he had understood. She hadn't just said he would walk again. She had known he would find his way to a life worth walking toward. The miracle hadn't been the restoration of his physical abilities. The miracle had been the discovery of his true purpose, using his gifts and resources to help others discover their own potential. In learning to walk again, Marcus had learned how to truly live, When Sarah stepped off the elevator a few minutes later, carrying a portfolio of architectural drawings, and looking both nervous and determined, Marcus greeted her with genuine enthusiasm. "Welcome," he said, extending his hand in greeting. "I understand you're interested in architecture. I'd love to see your work and hear about your dreams." As they settled down to look at her drawings together, Marcus thought about Destiny's extraordinary gift for seeing potential where others saw only problems. She had looked at a bitter, broken billionaire and seen someone who could become a force for positive change in the world. Now it was Marcus's turn to look for that same potential in others, to whisper promises of possibility to young people who needed someone to believe in their dreams. The circle of hope and healing would continue, growing stronger with each person who learned to see beyond their limitations to the extraordinary possibilities that awaited them. Outside his windows, the city sparkled with millions of lights, each one representing someone with hopes, dreams, and untapped potential. Marcus was ready to spend the rest of his life helping as many of them as possible discover what was truly possible when they learned to believe in miracles. The impossible had happened, and it was just the beginning. He who understands what real healing means. That evening, as Marcus sat by his windows watching the city lights twinkle below, he realized that his miracle was about much more than regaining the ability to walk. He was becoming a completely different person than he had been before the accident, someone who understood that true wealth couldn't be measured in bank balances or stock portfolios. Tomorrow would mark 2 weeks since Destiny had first entered his apartment with her impossible promise that he would walk again. Marcus was beginning to understand that she hadn't just been talking about physical healing. She had been offering him the chance to become the person he was truly meant to be. The final phase of his transformation was about to begin. The tingling sensation intensified immediately, spreading from his knees down to his feet and up toward his hips. Marcus gripped the arms of his wheelchair, uncertain whether he should be excited or afraid. "I can feel it," he whispered. "I can actually feel your hands on my legs." Destiny opened her eyes, and Marcus saw that they were filled with tears of joy. "The healing has started," she said simply. "Your body is remembering how to be whole." Marcus stared down at his legs, hardly daring to believe what he was experiencing. The sensation continued to pulse through his lower body, stronger and more real than anything he had felt in over 6 months. "Is this really happening?" he asked. "This is just the beginning," Destiny said. "Tomorrow, we're going to take the next step." That night, Marcus lay in bed with his hand resting on his thigh, marveling at the continued tingling sensations flowing through his legs. For the first time since his accident, he fell asleep with something that felt genuinely like hope. Destiny set down her cup and looked at Marcus with an expression of such compassion that he felt something crack open in his chest. "Mr. Wellington," she said softly, "healing isn't about deserving. It's about believing. And I believe you're going to walk again because I can see it." "What do you mean you can see it?" "I can see you standing up from that wheelchair. I can see you taking steps. I can see you running. It's not just hope or wishful thinking. I can actually see it happening." Marcus stared at this extraordinary child and felt something he hadn't experienced in 6 months. Not hope exactly, because that felt too dangerous, but curiosity, a tiny crack in the wall of despair he had built around his heart. When he heard himself ask, Destiny smiled, and for a moment, the entire apartment seemed brighter. "Soon, very soon. But first, you have to let me help you believe it's possible," down from a challenge. When competitors tried to undercut his prices, he found ways to offer better service. When economic downturns threatened his investments, he adapted his strategies and came out stronger. But this fight felt different because he couldn't see a path to victory. The phone calls from friends had stopped coming weeks ago. At first, people had reached out regularly, asking how he was doing and offering support. But Marcus had been so angry and dismissive that eventually, they stopped trying. He told himself he didn't need their pity, but the silence in his apartment suggested otherwise. Some nights, Marcus would sit by his floor-to-ceiling windows and watch the city lights flicker below. He would see people walking on sidewalks, jogging through parks, and living the kind of life he took for granted just months ago. The simple act of putting one foot in front of the other now seemed like a miracle he would never experience again. His business meetings had become phone conferences from his apartment. Even his most trusted employees seemed uncomfortable during video calls, unsure how to interact with their wheelchair-bound boss. Marcus could sense their discomfort, which only made him more angry and isolated. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent his entire adult life climbing higher, earning more, and accumulating possessions that were supposed to bring happiness. Now, sitting in his expensive wheelchair in his luxury penthouse, surrounded by all the material success he had worked so hard to achieve, Marcus had never felt more empty or alone. Tomorrow would mark exactly 6 months since the accident. 6 months since his life had changed in the span of a few terrible seconds. 6 months of hoping for a miracle that seemed further away with each passing day. Marcus had no idea that his miracle was about to arrive in the most unexpected form imaginable. As he prepared for bed that night, Marcus didn't know that his life was about to intersect with someone whose faith was stronger than his despair. He didn't know that sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from medical procedures or expensive treatments, but from human connection and unshakable belief in the impossible. The morning of September 16th would begin like every other morning in Marcus's new reality. But it would end with him questioning everything he thought he knew about hope, healing, and the power of faith to change everything.